Welcome back to another lesson in class, lesson 37, the visions of science. Is seeing believing? Let's get into it. So, one of my first points here, and as you know, I always use outlines or things like that, but one of my first points here is I have the little symbols here, and then I have the Deathly Hallows symbol from Harry Potter right there, right? Drawn a little slightly smaller, so on and so forth. But the other symbols relate to a PlayStation controller, and if you've seen Kendrick Lamar's halftime show, he put all the squares, the triangles, the circles, the X's on, and then it said game over. See, here's the thing. When you're looking at the Deathly Hallows symbol, you only think that there are, well, two symbols or three symbols, right? Because you have the circle, the line, and then the triangle, right? However, if you were to shift and remember lesson 1, perspective versus perception, you would understand that you can then take the square and the X, right? So let's say this is the square, and then you could take the X and place it inside of the square, right? And then of course you have the circle and the triangle. Now, if I wanted to hide these two shapes, all I have to do is shift the perspective, and now you just see a line. If I turned it this way, you would see a circle and a square and a X, right? Just like you see the image on this box. If I wanted to hide it, I would just change the orientation, changing your perception and your perspective exactly of what it is that you are seeing. So in actuality, when you look at it, you see 3, not 4, right? Which is very interesting because it all comes down to the angle in which you are viewing things, right? So let's continue. So, do people enjoy playing scientists and want to have power and control like one, right? See, scientists have power and control just like doctors, and other professionals have power and control based upon the licenses that they have, right? Now, when you get a driver's license, you have power and control over the vehicle, and you can kind of understand where it's going unless there is an accident or detrimental terrain such as, black ice, snow, a downpour because maybe a hurricane is something like that. Hold on one second. Let me fix the mic. All right. We're good. So, when you go to these places and, even if you served in the military, some of you may know that the military bases are actually students that get to operate on soldiers, as credits because they need live bodies. And well, we signed a contract anyways for that. So they do their testing on us, and then they work to civilians, so on and so forth. So yes, when they say you served your country, you literally served your country, and you even sacrificed your body if you went to medical because you had students performing things on you, being overseen by a professional. So I don't know how the other branches work, but I do know Camp Pendleton Naval Hospital, that's exactly how that operated there. So let's continue. Does magic reveal that seeing is believing? So most people would say, oh yeah, I have faith, this, that, and the third, and faith comes by hearing, right? But what about, the sight portion, right? If you see something, does it then make it more real, right? If you were to see this pen, right? And then we flick and then it disappears and then I bring it back, right? That would be an effect, right? But is seeing believing? Would that make you believe that I have the ability to perform magic tricks for a large amount of people, a children's birthday party, whatever the case may be? See, most people will hear things, but they always need proof. Remember that. And in psychology and sociology, they have something called social proof. People may hear you have this or that, but it's not until the moment that they see it or someone else speaks upon your behalf and shows them a photo or whatever, thank you, social media, that then they start to not only believe it, but they ask more questions. They treat you differently based upon the things not only that they heard of, but that they saw, right? And if you remember past lessons, I remember there was one that was uh, hearing with your eyes and seeing with your ears, right? So remember that. If you haven't seen that lesson, go back and check it out. It's within the playlist, and then get back to this and jump back in. So let's continue. So let's talk about some current events, right? How did what happened to Charlie Kirk come to pass? See, I've noticed that there are advanced areas of science and within law enforcement that can dictate certain things, behaviors, etc., and they could put blocks and stops on certain people. And thanks to, well, Edward Snowden, what's it called? Saying that, well, they are listening. Well, that's what you get for the price of safety. Of course they're listening. But if they were listening to everything and looking at your web data or data as well, and they're able to do this to multiple different people, why didn't they do this with the shooter that happened with Charlie Kirk? How can they not, utilize his phone, his electronics? Was he that smart that he outthunk the law enforcement and local police and got so close and was able to pull something off successfully? See, because at the end of the day, his end game could have been to, well, get the death penalty, or if he got a chance of escaping, he got a chance of escaping. But even still, he got away with something. How is it with AI and everything else and other things that have occurred, along the way with advancements in science and technology, that this was able to happen? See, most people will be like, if you've seen the movie Minority Report, you remember they were able to stop crimes before they actually happened. If that's the case, because, well, if you type into Google and it's able to predict what you're going to say next, couldn't that, be utilized to understand people's behavioral patterns, what they're researching, what they're looking up, their intent, so on and so forth, cross-reference that with any violent past or history? I mean, if that's, something that's true, which I believe it to be, then why wasn't that technology used to stop the death of a celebrity, right? Because, he had, 3 million subscribers on YouTube alone, if not more. Freedom of speech is not free, but if you wish to express that freedom of speech, you have to understand the consequences that come with certain words within the country in which you reside. They just had a protest in the UK, and I'm sure that, they must have said stuff and people got arrested, so on and so forth, for saying things that people did not like. That is history, and we're going to get into pattern recognition later. So, next point. Does advanced science scare people, and does fear work? So, does advanced science scare people, and does fear work? If you want to scare somebody, well, you have to first find out what scares them or what they fear. Once you find out what they fear, then you're able to utilize that leverage point in order to take advantage of them, or to get them to do what you want to do, or to control them in some sort of manipulative way. And then, of course, with advanced science, if you can manipulate those things, could you also manipulate other things, such as, well, brain waves and how the body reacts to certain things? Could you, think of the movie Iron Man, where they came out with that supersonic thing? You remember the first Iron Man? The bald guy with the beard, I forgot his name. He went and he had this little device. It looked like a key fob. And he clicked it, and it paralyzed Tony Stark, right? And when it paralyzed Tony Stark, they gave him the opportunity to rip the thing out of his chest that he wanted, which was the reactor, so on and so forth, and then, do what he had to do. It was a military advanced tool, right? Well, if things like that, actually exist, and I'm not going to say that they don't, because they probably do, could they not hack into someone's brain, right? Think about it, right? Using the similar technology, right, in order to control them like an avatar. It's possible. I'm pretty sure it is. We do deal with the electromagnetic spectrum, and we pick up signals and everything, all around us. So this leads me to my next point. Does a combination of neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, deepfake videos, and AI make people believe false statements and brainwash people? Well, it could happen, right? Because if you program into AI the understanding of neurolinguistic programming, how to use it effectively, right? And it has that understanding. Then you give it the understanding of hypnosis, right? With somebody there, a proctor or somebody to oversee everything. Then you incorporate deep fake videos. These are AI generated videos or other deep fake videos that they would sew into the fabric of a video that everybody watches. However, because of AI and how quick it is, it can alter the video for specific people based upon IP address or the IME or whatever that's on the phone's device. And then that coupled with AI and all its understanding can put people into a hypnotic state that with certain keywords, thanks to neurolinguistic programming, they can do crazy things, right? And so if you ever watch some podcasts where they talk about spies and sexpionage and all this, a lot of spies who end up in sexpionage get told passwords or safe words. Now, safe words would be something that they would say out loud so that their team could overhear them, and then their kill words or something similar fashion, meaning because they already put the subject under hypnotic trance using the combination I said earlier, along with some other things, the only thing that person would have to do is literally say a word, maybe with a song playing, and it would trigger that individual to do an action or carry out an action similar to Manchurian Candidate. So I've seen it happen, especially in the magic community. We're in North Carolina now, and the Renaissance Fair is coming. So at the Renaissance Fair, they have a hypnotist there, and he hypnotizes a couple people when they come on stage, and it's quite interesting, right? You have some people that start walking super sexy. You have guys that do other things. They start dancing like they're in the movie Grease. It's hilarious, but it is possible. And if it's possible there, why wouldn't it not be possible in other realms as well? So, moving on to the next point. We have seen the movie The Matrix, and now we have AI. What more do you need, right? Let's do a mic check real quick. We're still good. So what more do you need, right? We have artificial intelligence. We have the movie The Matrix that came out years ago, and we know DARPA and their technology is about 20 years advanced, so they have a slow release process so that they not only understand how to utilize the technology, but to defend themselves as well against it. So with AI and ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Perplexity, and everything else, how is this going to play out in the long run, right? Because it seems as though that things that were once television shows or movies or documentaries that were slightly hypothetical are now coming to fruition. People saw The Matrix, thought that was the best thing in the world. Remember in the movie, they talked about how humans, their failure literally came with the advancements of AI. And then little by little, AI got smarter, etc., and then turned humanity into a battery. So remember that. So next point. If seeing is believing, then how and why did Judas need to identify Jesus? Well, throughout, different stories, I'm going to talk about Christianity and the Bible for a second, but within the New Testament, yes, people knew who he was, but the guards, the people that were after him, did not know what he looked like, right? So apparently they needed Judas to identify him because he was a part of the inner circle, which meant no one knew exactly what he looked like until they got to meet him in person. And then, of course, they knew how to keep a secret. Judas was the one that sold them out for profits, right? So, and I don't know if you remember the other video, or to profiteer, right? Because when you profiteer, it's normally a negative thing and it makes people cry. So you have the tear, wrongful doing. Back in the day, they used to hire privateers, so on and so forth, naval vessels that flew underneath no flag in order to carry out either private missions or to, conduct other things, or piracy along those sorts. So profiteering is different than making a profit, right? So he was profiteering. Now, in certain books, it says that he was obviously not trying to do that, that he was only acting underneath the real Jesus's commands, etc., to point somebody out. But then why identify them with a kiss and everything else? Why not just point the finger? Why, because he had to show that this person was so close to them, they were comfortable with the intimacy or with them in that space, right? And there's a lot of other things. I could see if I could get in contact with Father Ralph, who used to be my priest, who taught me a lot of the stuff that I know and understand, along with a couple other members of clergy that I know. But let's continue with more points and moving forward. So, what if most of what we have actually seen exists, right? So what if most of what we have seen actually exists? Now, what do I mean by this? See, if seeing is believing, if you saw what you saw on television in a movie or a television show in person, would you then believe it? And if that's the case, then why don't you believe a lot of other things along with it? See, you may be watching television and hearing things, but because it's not actually right in your face, something that's tangible, right? You can't touch or feel what's on the screen. You can only perceive that through hearing and then creating this imaginary world where you're almost in the movie or in the television show, right? So if you were to see things like The Matrix or Harry Potter or whatever the case may be, would you actually believe it? And if so, what would you do then, right? What would you do if stuff like you saw in Star Trek or Star Wars was actually real, or even that of the Avengers? Would you think a little bit differently? Who knows? But it's a way to get the gears turning so that you guys can go ahead and move forward in this progression of class. So I have a question for you guys. If you can see the future, would you try to change it with technology or your knowledge or your information, that which of, right? So if you can go to the future. Now, there was a thing, I think it was called Project Looking Glass or whatever, where they were able to go and see the future using Einstein's theory of special relativity. I might be getting that confused with something else. But then you also have these TV shows like Timeline, or the movie Timeline. There's Timeless and a couple other things, right? And then, of course, you have H.G. Wells, who also, had the time, travel machine, so on and so forth, Back to the Future. So would you try to change it? And if so, would you change it for yourself, for your family, for a community, for a state, for a group of people? Would you try to change it for the betterment of the whole world? What would you do? Go ahead and leave that in the comments. And if you're getting anything out of this video, go ahead and smash that like button. And don't forget to share this with some people so that they too can subscribe to the video. And also hit that like button because, well, the more people you bring in, the more people you're going to have to discuss with. And then, of course, we build a nice little community of nice little philosophical thinkers who understand creativity, logic, art, science. And when we get into spirituality and emotion, we'll have a nice little brainstorm session. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys there. So let's continue. Could the elites handle an increase in population? Now, I've heard people talk about population control, this, that, and the third. They spray the skies, etc. And all that may be true. The thing is, could the elites handle the increased population? See, because with increased population comes increased law enforcement and everything else. And then eventually people are going to want to break apart. See, I think it's interesting because China used to have a cap on the amount of children that they can have because, well, they're such a large society and it was very difficult to provide for them. Now, looking at American history and everything else, I'm trying to understand the numbers because the math isn't mathing. as far as the rate of growth in certain areas. So I'll let you guys look that up, but how is there only 300 million people here, if that, in the United States, but then of course like a billion in India, a billion in China, so on and so forth. And then you look at the UK and Europe, which has been around longer than the United States, and those numbers are very interesting as well and a lot lower. Where did those people go? Think about it. So, moving on to the next point. If seeing is believing, then if one can create something to help the many, why do the few stop it? So, a long time ago, me and a couple friends decided to start making like a little group. We were into physics, what's it called? Electronic engineering, mechanical engineering. One of us, because of the TV show Prison Break, got into civil engineering because that's what the brother was. He was a civil engineer, worked on buildings, facilities. And so we just started building stuff. And I remember hearing a lot of rumors. And of course, in the last lesson, I discussed the Secrecy Act and didn't think we would get in trouble until a couple of years later, where, eventually the Department of Energy, their intelligence group, started kicking in, asking a lot of questions as far as what we were doing with solar panels and making them efficient. One of my other friends literally got told that whatever you make, we now own, on his computer. So that was pretty interesting. A couple other people got their stuff ripped off, and somebody probably must have made boatloads of cash because, well, when you're dealing with electricity or clean water, that's the utility company, and the utility company makes crazy amounts of money off that. If you were able to, well, use less energy, they would save money. Everybody would save money, especially if it's solar power that operates at a higher efficiency rate. So instead of having it 30, you would have it around maybe 50 or 60, and now you get more bang for your buck. And, well, let's just face it, it would be a lot better, right? And then, of course, desalination plants that are more effective, etc., that could produce, let's say, 100 million gallons of water a day, which they already have in California. This one was just, had some tweaks made to it to make it a lot better and a lot faster. Also utilizing solar energy along with a couple other things, having an outlet for everything. And then, of course, they got told that if this came forward, that they would, their family and stuff would be injured. It was a long story. Anyways, I digress. Why is it that the few try to stop, what can help the many, but then the media pushes out what's happening amongst the many and how we should feel bad about it, but nobody ever does anything, right? It's like, I hear a lot of people, and, you see Bad Bunny, Jennifer Lopez, and all these people, and they're like, oh, Puerto Rico this, Puerto Rico that, but I don't see any of them actually investing in rebuilding it. They're just speaking about it, right? If they want something to change, they have to be the example and lead by example as such, right? So think about that. Now, can you use AI to help the many? Of course you fucking can. I mean, you got fucking ChatGPT, you got Google Gemini, you got Perplexity, you got all these different AI features that you can literally ask questions to, turn it into a doctor, turn it into a lawyer, turn it into a scientist or engineer, and then ask it to troubleshoot or help you design something that can help the many, such as a more efficient desalination plant, more efficiency with solar panels. How do you produce hydrogen-powered vehicles at a lower cost because of the fuel and the cost that it takes to make hydrogen currently, because it's not a popular fuel consumption, right? Or it's not in popular use for fuel consumption. So the last 2 points, hopefully they help you open up your mind a little bit, right? The second to last point I want to get at is, does art contribute to science's creativity? Now, from my own standing and my own point of view, I would say yes, because without the art aspect, right, how would science be able to test anything, right? And then, of course, how would they be able to express their own version of creativity when it comes to creating something, right? Now, when you look at chemicals, they're going to be in different colors. That makes things, a lot easier to identify, which is from art or creativity. Then, of course, the birth of a new element and a new alloy, something that can help people, graphene, etc., right? That can give birth to other things, right? A sketch of a building, so on and so forth. Then the civil engineer can then build that to specifications using proper measurements and angles. And now you have a fully erect structure that looks amazing, right? So I think from that standpoint, yes, art does contribute to science's creativity, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Now, for the last point, how pattern recognition works and how it can help. So if you don't know what pattern recognition is, it means pretty much that you're able to see something happen over and over again the same way, and then over time, when that thing pops up, you're able to identify it faster, right? This would be your pattern recognition. If somebody were to change something within the pattern, you would be able to recognize the change because, well, history is bound to repeat itself. I mean, anybody that studies humanities or history or marketing or business, etc., liberal arts, can tell you that one, pattern recognition is useful and utilized because history repeats itself. So if you're in the financial sector, you can look at the history of a company, and if it has gone up consistently within the last 3 to 5 years, then there is a good or better chance that it's going to continue to increase over the next at least 48 months to 12 months, depending on if there's a war or not, right? So that historical analysis of financial data, such as investments, stock options, etc., can behoove you to, or push you to invest in those companies based upon historical data and pattern recognition trends, right? That's how you leverage information, and you utilize this cheat code for your own life when investing, right? You identify, okay, who are the movers and the shakers for the last 3 to 5 years. Now you know what industry to go into that has the movers and shakers that you can go ahead and invest in, whether that be directly or indirectly. And that's the difference between preferred and common stock. But we're going to get into all that in a different category of, not class, but a different playlist that I'll be putting together as a lessons for you guys when it comes to finances. But this is how pattern recognition can help you. If you're in marketing, you can look at the history of companies that are similar to the one that you're trying to market, what worked for them in their marketing, advertisements or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's a guerrilla style marketing method, and then see what worked for them and then adapt what is useful to you from their method, and then you can grow from there. So, I mean, these are just, some things that I want you to not only think about, but begin to start processing, because we're in lesson 37. We're going to be moving into spirituality, and then after that, I'll be getting into emotion. However, with all the lessons that have been given from, creativity to logic to art, start to slow down your response time and begin to not only understand, and if you don't understand, ask, right? But start asking questions instead of making statements. Most people will make statements in hopes that it comes off like a question. Say, I stopped, right? There was a pause, right? And that's normally what would happen in conversation. So they would make a statement in hopes that it would come off as a question and pause, in hopes that the person would respond, because they have picked up on the pattern of speech and communication, and they're able to now just play upon that. If they actually asked a question, there would be an inflection or something of the sort that would infer with speech alone that a question was there, right? Because you were prompted to do so. Now, when it comes to getting into spirituality, finishing up science portion and things like that, and bringing stuff together, I want you guys to also employ some of the things you learned from creativity, logic, and art as we wrap up in science, right? Yeah, science could be checked out and everything else, but the moment we start getting to spirituality, that's where we get into the philosophical portion of class. And you would need to have the creativity, logic, art, and science understanding to understand the philosophical portion. Because, yes, psychology's in there. English or communication is in there from creativity and logic, right? The poetry that is spoken within spirituality, which comes from art, is in there, right? The analogies and metaphors and what they pertain to and how they relate to certain things may come from science because they have a sociological understanding or psychological understanding, but the verbiage still comes from the logic and the creativity part. And then I'm going to be breaking it down Barney style or in a simple format for all you guys to consume, digest, and hopefully enjoy. So until the next lesson of class, take care, God bless, and peace.